On behalf of the Materials Science and Engineering Department, I'm very happy that everyone could be here today to hear Professor Pond give his famous Fun with Metals talk. It's quite appropriate that Pond do this. You know, he's very famous for this because some of us aren't quite so adept at such lecture demonstrations. In fact, often things don't go quite as we would have them. Some of you may recall me telling a story about my first teaching experience where the students were to learn something about the acceleration due to gravity by dropping a red ball down the stairwell, sort of like here at Maryland Hall, and measure the time that the ball passed the various levels in the stair by listening at the ticks of a metronome. And being a novice at teaching and very nervous, I asked some students to get in the basement, some get in the first floor, second floor, third floor, and I went up in the attic with the other students, gave one guy the metronome and one guy the ball, and I said, okay, let it go. This guy threw over the metronome. The other guy said, what do I do with the ball? So I told him. Now, I'm sure having seen Professor Pond give this lecture a number of times, you'll all enjoy it. I warned him, however, that unlike the case that he normally talks to a group of high school students, that you people, many of you have doctoral degrees from Johns Hopkins, a number of you are professional medical doctors, other distinguished guests and so forth. And he said not to worry, he'll still treat you like you were high school students.
Bet Jack Benny would like that. I came here to talk to the young at heart, and so I'm presuming you're all young at heart, and therefore my lecture is addressed to you. Now, it'll be a good lecture if you do what you're supposed to. This is called an audience participation lecture. That means you're supposed to talk to me. If you participate, then I say, hey, I did a grand job. If you don't participate, then what I do is say, that was the dumbest audience I think I've ever talked to. First thing I would like to do is I'd like to check out the acoustics, and so I'm going to ask the gentleman that's sitting all the way in the back, will you hold up your hand? Now, you're my guinea pig. Now, what I'm going to do is tell a little story, and as I tell this story, if you get so you cannot hear me, will you hold up your hand? Now I'll know how to adjust my voice. Once upon a time, there were 3 little birds and a mama bird and an old man bird, and she had them in the nest, and she sent the old man off to get some worms. Well, he didn't come home. It was kind of mid-afternoon, and he still hadn't come home. The little chicks are getting pretty hungry. And she decided, you know, I guess I better go get this food. And so she flies away to get some worms, and she didn't come home. It's almost sunset. And the first little bird is getting kind of weak, okay? And hungry. And he decided, I've seen Mom and Dad do this. So he climbs up on the edge of the nest, stretches his little wings, and one dead bird, okay? It's almost dark. The second little bird says, hey, I'm getting hungry, I gotta try this. And he climbed up on the edge of the nest and stretches his little wings, and 2 dead birds. It's sunrise. The third little bird has spent all day long, all night long in the nest. He's cold, he's wet, he's about to starve. He says, I have no choice, I gotta try it. So he climbs up on the edge of the nest, okay? Stretches his little wings, opens his mouth, says, hang on! You hear me all right? Okay. Well, I know I can reach you. And since I can reach you, I have some questions to ask you now. I want to give a talk. I want to teach you something in the talk. And so I think we better search for the definition of what in the world a good teacher is. Does anyone here have a definition of a good teacher? Hold up your hands, please. Got to be a definition. Come on. Is there anybody here who wants to be a good teacher? Well, let me tell you something, young at heart. Most of the people who are young at heart will wind up being teachers because the biggest group of teachers in the world have a special name. Do you know what we call them? Parents. Now, I would like to know if there's someone here who thinks that they might take the test for being a good teacher. Like, for instance, this young lady. Do you think you're a good teacher? Yes, she does. Now, if there's something that you know how to do, and I know you know how to do, would you tell everybody else so they can do it? Because that's my definition of a good teacher. Would you try? What's your name? Sharon, right? Sharon, tell the class how to tie your shoes, will you? Now, I'll follow along so they can get it. Would you tell them?
Cross the ends. Bring one end around the other. Okay, let's start over.
Well, actually, this is a pretty difficult thing to do. And here's what parents do, you see. Parent tells a child, I'm going to teach you how to tie your shoes this morning. So you get up in the morning, you just take your shoestrings in your hand and you tie them. Is that what you were trying to say? Right? And when you go to bed at night, you just pull on them and it comes apart, right? And they tell him, now look, when you get up in the morning and you tie your shoestring like that, be real careful and don't get those ends through those loops because you're never going to get that apart, right? Unless you happen to be a material science man, you go, and it all just comes apart anyhow, right? Well, you see, what they did is they really showed the child how to tie the shoes, didn't tell them. And if you want to tell somebody something, you have to have a common language. We have to understand that the names of a piece of rope. Like, for instance, every piece of rope or every piece of string has a bitter end, has two bitter ends. And if you put the bitter ends together, then this is called a bight. That's the names of a piece of rope. You only need one other piece of information now to tell you how to tie your shoes. And that is, do you know that there are only two kinds of knots in the world? Only two. Doesn't make any difference whether you're in the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the Navy, or what. This is called a half hitch. Let go of the end, doesn't hold very much. There's another knot like unto it, and it looks like this. You put it around and you tuck it through, make a little loop there. And this funny little thing is called, in the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatnot, that's called an overhand knot. In the Navy, it's called a marlin hitch. A little bit more difficult to pull apart. Now I can tell you how to tie your shoes. You get up in the morning, you take a bitter end in each hand, and you make a marlin hitch or an overhand knot. That's the first thing you do, right? And then you make a bight of each bitter end, and then you make a marlin hitch of the bight. And there you have your shoes all tied. When you go to bed at night, you have to pull it apart, and you always have this funny little knot to take apart, right? So what you need is a common language. Now, the name of my talk today is Fun in Metals. And I don't have to ask a bunch of people that are young in heart what fun is. We all know what that is, right? In's just a preposition. But what's a metal? Can you tell me what a metal is? Anybody tell me what a metal is? Yes?
Shiny, conducts electricity, and heat and stuff.
Hey, that sounds pretty good. Actually, you know, he's feeding me a lot of things, though, that I don't quite understand, right? Because if I get a pool of salt water that's shiny on top, conducts electricity, that ductility thing's got me a little confused. It'll flow, certainly, right? But shiny. Do you know what a metal is? Let me ask you a question. Suppose Owen said to you, Merrill, out there on the lawn, there's a piece of metal. It's going to get caught in the lawnmower. Would you run out there and bring you back a piece of wood? So you do know what a metal is. You just don't want to tell me, right? All right. Well, we still have to get a good definition. You know, shiny does, the thing you would identify, if I held up this thing out on the lawn, you say, it looks like a metal, right? It's shiny. But when I get my wife out on that patio Saturday night to dance, right? The moon shine those beautiful shiny eyes of hers. Man, that ain't a metal, right? No way. So being shiny doesn't fill the prescription, and we have a little problem here. Is anybody else thinks they know what a metal is? Do you?
If it was made by Bob Pond, it's a metal.
Maybe. Crystalline substance, like a diamond. Right? Well, you know, we have a problem with this. Actually, we could go through this exercise for a long period of time, and I won't belabor it, but I want to tell you something. You don't know what a metal is. He doesn't even know what a metal is. And we have a name for that group of people that don't know what a metal is. Do you know what we call them? Metallurgists, that's right. They don't know what a metal is. And so what they really do is they say, we'll make up a definition. A metal is an element. You know, one of those things in the periodic table that everything has to be made of. A metal is an element that has metallic properties. Now you try that on your English teacher and they clobber you, you know. They won't allow you to get away with that. But that's what we do. And then we go to work and we enumerate those properties. Now we've hung with some of them. And like it's shiny, metals are shiny. What do you mean it's shiny? Well, we don't really even know what that means. So we put a special name on it. You know what we call that? Metallic sheen, right? It looks like a cow, you call it a cow. Looks like a metal, you call it a metal, right? That's all you really do. So we have to then see how many properties we have. Property of a metal. Could you tell me a property of a metal? Not one? Let me ask you a question. Suppose they gave me permission to take you up on top of the building and with a little thread, say 20 thousandths of an inch in diameter, hold you over the edge of this building. Would you rather it be made out of a piece of cotton or a piece of metal? Why? Hey, metals are strong, right? Metals are strong, and they're crystalline in a solid state, and they're shiny. Now, let's see if we can get another property. Could you tell me a property of a metal? Did you ever make a kite? Did you know, yourself? Did you make this? What did you make the struts out of? Why? Why didn't you make them out of metal? Wood was available. Well, that's a good answer. Anybody else? Why wouldn't you make the struts in a kite out of metal? Heavy. You think metals are heavy then, right? Yeah. Do you know all metals are heavy? What's not heavy? Aluminum. Suppose I gave you a cubic foot of aluminum. How much do you think it would weigh? Guess. You don't know. Guess. You've handled aluminum, right? Yeah. Well, would a cubic foot weigh like a pound, 10 pounds, what, 50 pounds? 150, he says. What would you say? 2 ounces. 2 ounces. What would you say? A cubic foot of aluminum weighs 170 pounds. Metals are heavy. Do you know that some marbles are lighter than aluminum? That's why we make airplanes out of marble. Well, let's get on with the properties now. It's crystalline when it's solid. It's strong material. It's heavy material. It has a metallic sheen. Anything else? Conducts electricity and conducts also thermal energy very well. Good conductor. Well, let me tell you the problem. We enumerate all of those properties that an element has to have to be a metal, and we put a bunch of metallurgists in a room and say, okay, now how many of these properties does this element have to have before we're going to call it a metal? And they can't agree, right? It isn't a recipe that you have to have 3 or 5 or 6, and so we really don't know what a metal is. Well, we get along pretty good, so I'd like to ask this question. And let's see, I'll ask that lady right there. Would you tell me what this is? Do you know what this is? A coat hanger, right. Do you think it's a metal coat hanger? No. How many of you think this is a metal coat hanger? Let's see your hands real quick. And how many of you think it isn't a metal coat hanger? Let's see your hands. And how many of you don't think? Let me see your hands. Right? Yeah, we got a few of those. Well, this is not a metal coat hanger, right? This is an alloy coat hanger. Oh. Now, we've got to find out what an alloy is. Now, what do you think an alloy is? Oh, it's...
A mix of one or more elements.
That's almost right, but not quite. Because The only thing that you did wrong in that is one of those elements has got to be a metal, right? An alloy is a combination of at least one metal and at least one other element. So for instance, and the second element doesn't have to be a metal. So for instance, this particular alloy is called steel, and it's an alloy of iron, that's a metal, and carbon. Carbon's not a metal, right? So you almost had it right. Okay, now I want to tell you something. Metallurgists are sloppy people, as a rule. Not just speaking for myself, but my observation is that almost every metallurgist, if he were married or she were married, would ask their mate, get me a metal coat hanger at the closet, right? Or ask that. What they really mean is, get me a metallic coat hanger out of the closet. Because alloys have metallic properties. We talk about metallic materials. Okay, so now we know the difference between a metal and an alloy, and we can start talking about all of these things now. And I want to ask you a few questions, like for instance, did you know that all metallic, solid metallic materials are crystalline, are made out of crystals? Did you know that? Well, they are. Will you believe me if I tell you that? Well, now that you believe me, have you ever had any metal crystals in your hand? Now, she's not going to be a good politician. Look, I just told her all solid metals are crystalline, and she's had solid metals in her hand. She must have had metal crystals in her hand, right? But there's a reason that you don't know that, and the reason is that metal crystals are generally very tiny things. So, for instance, when you ate dinner last night, when you eat tonight, you have, say, a stainless steel knife. There'd be about 25,000 crystals in that knife. That means you'd have to have a microscope to see the crystals. I got to tell you a story because I want to play this game with you to find out if you really pay attention to what you're doing in this world. Up there in Carroll County where I live, there's a farmer that had a dog, a beautiful hunting dog, a bird dog, and he never got to hunt the dog. Some people think farmers are lazy and, can hunt anytime. Not so. This guy worked and worked, and finally, after having the dog for 3 years, he says, I'm going to hunt that dog. He went, it was duck season. He goes down the river. It's a beautiful day, and he goes out on the river with the dog, and he shoots a duck, and the duck falls in the river and splashes, and the dog jumped up and ran out on top of the water, picked the duck up, ran back in on top of the water. Well, the farmer shook his head. It's early in the morning, He shot another duck, and it splashed in the water, and the dog jumped up and ran out on top of the water, picked the duck up and ran back in on top of the water. All day long, the dog ran back and forth on top of the water. Now, this is a smart farmer. He knows if he goes home, tells his folks about that, they're going to put him in the booby hatch, right? He didn't do that. He goes home, calls up his friend Amos, says, Amos, let's go hunting. Fine. When? Tomorrow morning. The next morning at 5:30, down the river went the farmer, his friend Amos, and his dog. Amos is a good shot, and he drops a duck right in the water. Dog splashes. The duck splashes in the water. The dog jumps up, runs it on top of the water, picks the duck up, runs back in on top of the water. And the farmer watches Amos. He didn't even change his expression. All day long, the dog runs back and forth on top of the water. And finally, the farmer couldn't stand it anymore. Says, Amos, tell me something. You notice anything unusual about that dog of mine? And Amos says, I sure did. That crazy dog can't swim. Now, there's a moral to this story. And the moral to this story is this, that some of us go through life and we look at things and we never even see them. And still others of us go through life and we look at things and we see them, but we never really observe them. And still others of us go through life, we look at things, we see them, we observe them, and we draw the wrong conclusion to our observation. So for tonight, if I can show you you do one of those things, I'm going to call you an Amos. And there's a lot of Amos in all of us. And what I want to know right now is there anybody here that's ever seen a metal crystal? So they look at it and say, hey, that's a metal crystal. Mm-hmm. Tell me where. Huh? Big bronze casting, yeah. Right, but you had to look in the microscope, right? Well, let me tell you, lots of people think they've never seen a metal crystal. And the reason that they think this is because they're Amoses. You see, I know I've been all over this country, a little bit of Canada, and the first thing I do when I go to give a talk anywhere is not go to the bathroom, but the first thing I do is to look at the doorknobs. Because there are a lot of buildings, old buildings, that have brass doorknobs in which the metal crystals have grown to be very big and have been polished up with your hands and your gloves and etched with caprylic acid, that's sweat to you. And that delineates the crystal, and it looks like, if you look at it, it looks like an aerial view of flying over farmland. And each one of those little splotches is a crystal. And if you've never seen them, you're an Amos. Suppose I met this young man for the first time. I'd shake hands with him, and it's Mr. Dietrich, right? Now, would I shake hands with him and be looking off at, Mr. Dietrich, I certainly am glad. Of course you wouldn't do that. When you meet somebody and shake hands with him, you look at him. When you shake hands with a doorknob, look at the doorknob. It'll talk to you. It'll tell you things. It says, hey, look, I'm crystalline. I'm different. Right? Well, that's the name of the game. And the name of the game is, you see, if we pay attention, nature is going to talk to us. There was a guy who wrote this in beautiful language one time. His name was William Shakespeare. I love this passage. It hangs on in the wall of my home. And it says, it's from As You Like It. It says, and this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds sermons in stones, tongues in trees, books in running brooks, and good in everything. And old Wild Bill knew what he was talking about. He was saying, don't be an Amos. Open up your eyes. Nature's going to talk to you, right? So now that you know the name of the game, Debbie, have you ever seen a metal crystal and you look at it and say, hey, there's a metal crystal? Did you ever? No. Now, I know she's an Amos, and here's how I know she's an Amos. Have you ever seen a brand new metal garbage can? Did it sort of scintillate, sort of wink at you when you went by? Right. Well, you see, if you look carefully, you'd see that's a crystal. Now, how in the world would you ever know that? Well, to know that, we've got to learn some words. The first word, we've already learned what a metal is and an alloy, but now we have to learn the word isotropy. If something is isotropic, a material is isotropic, it means if we measure a property in that material in every direction, we get one value. And if we take a material and we find out when we measure this property in every direction has a different value, we say it's not isotropic, or it's anisotropic, or it possesses anisotropy. Got all these words now? Okay. And so I want to ask you a question now, Debbie. Have you ever seen an anisotropic material? One that has different properties in different directions? Yeah, she can't think of it. Well, you see, I know she's playing Amos because you see, if you had a log of wood, right, you wouldn't try to split it like this. You'd sit it up on the end and try to split. Why? Because it splits easier, right? You said splits easier. I say it's anisotropic, right? Has different value of that property in different directions. Well, the interesting thing is, in my hand, I have a board now. I made this board 40 years ago, and I've been running around talking to people like you and showing them this board. So I make the crystals real big. From where you sit, you should be able to see a nice, bright, shiny spot that turns dark, or a dark spot that turns bright and shiny. How about my guinea pig up there? Can you tell it from there? Right. In each one of those little areas now, that's a crystal, right? That's one crystal. But you have to understand why you can see it. And you can pass that around, and you can all look at it. And don't hold on to it too long. We'll never finish. The reason you can see those crystals is because it's been etched. It's been put in an acid. Well, here's what happens. If you took a single crystal sphere of aluminum, a sphere, let's say, the size of a lacrosse ball, and it's a one crystal, and you put it in, say, hot sodium hydroxide, 10% solution, and boil it for a couple of hours and take it out, it would no longer be a sphere, it would be a cube. That's because this material is chemically anisotropic. It dissolves faster in one crystal direction than in another crystal direction. Preserves those cube faces. Well, if I have a board like this board, and it has two crystals adjacent to each other, same material, just oriented differently. If we etched it, it digs a little cube pit in the crystal, and the cube pit will look like that over here. Same cube pit will be oriented differently over here. So if the light shines down and reflects from this pit to my eye, this one isn't oriented to make a reflection, and so you don't see it as a shiny spot. Tilt the board, and that one reflects, and this one doesn't. All right? Now, that's not the reason you could see the crystal in the garbage can. The reason you could see the crystal in the garbage can, oh, we got to learn another word. Let's say this word is dendrite. Anybody here knows the definition of a dendrite? Tree-like. That's right. Dendron means tree in Greek, so I understand. It's all Greek to me. But nevertheless, I think that's what it is. A dendrite is a tree and a tree-like structure. If you studied biology, you know that they call you nerve ends, dendrites, right? When a metal solidifies many times, it solidifies by growing like a tree. We could play a game. Let's suppose that this room is filled with molten zinc, and right where my feet are, there's a cold spot. What would happen is it would start to crystallize. It'll grow the trunk of a tree, and the tree trunk will have branches, and the branches will have limbs, and the limbs will have twigs. And if I could suck the rest of the molten zinc away, all of a sudden, I'd see that tree sitting right up there in space. You don't believe that, do you, Merrill? Well, I didn't think you'd believe it, so I brought it along with me, right? And I'll pass it around. And what we have here is a piece of steel. It's in plastic, so you can't get it dirty. And we took this piece of steel and we dipped it in molten zinc so we can get a nice galvanized steel. But when we pulled it out, it started to solidify in a lot of spots, grew all these beautiful little trees. And the reason you can see them is because the molten zinc was running off of them all of a sudden. And just pass it around, if you will. And so you see that in relief. You see the dendrite in relief. Gee whiz. You know, this reminds me of when I was a boy. I got in a lot of trouble when I was a boy. This lady that's sitting here could verify that. She spanked me every time I did that. But nevertheless, when I was a boy, one day I was going to school. We lived down in the southeastern tip of Virginia. Didn't get too cold very often, but this day, about 19 degrees Fahrenheit, and little Tony and myself were going to school. And there was a galvanized iron rail alongside the railroad track right there. And it was cold. And I said, hey, Tony, put your tongue on that. And he did. You know what happened? The skin came off his tongue. I got home, skin came off me somewhere else. But nevertheless, let me tell you something, young at heart. There's a great experiment you can do with dendrites. You see, when materials crystallize, many times they do so by making these trees. And if you're not an Amos and you just wake up and look at them, you see these trees. Anybody seen any crystal trees recently? Anybody? Where?
Top of a bucket freezing on my terrace.
Yeah. And did you have to go look that far? No. Because if you wake up in the morning, in the wintertime, nice and humid and in your house and warm and cold as blazes outside, and you look at the window and you see that beautiful pattern that you call what? Frost. And I call it a dendrite, right? See, it's just a language problem we have. Well, let me tell you something. I never grew up. Well, that's obvious. Mentally, I never grew up. And I think I know how young people think. And they think, gee whiz, you know, if I keep studying hard and I find out all about this, I'm going to go to college and get a baccalaureate or maybe a master's, maybe a PhD. Then I'm going to, they're going to give me my own laboratory, and there's going to be flashing lights and retorts and computers, and then am I ever going to do research? And do you know what? If you wait until that time to do research, you probably never do it. Because being a scientist means having an insatiable desire to find out what makes things tick. You can't afford to wait. You got to find it like right now. So I want to tell you a grand experiment that has to do with dendritic crystallization. Next time you eat ice cream, before you start eating the ice cream now, and do it with a metallic spoon, say a stainless steel spoon. Stick it in your mouth, drag it out loaded with saliva. Perfectly sanitary experiment. Turn it bowl down in the ice cream. Don't let any ice cream get over the side. Just sit there and watch it. And all of a sudden you'll see a frost film go sweeping across the spoon. That's because the little limbs of the dendrite are growing, break up the light, can't reflect from the spoon, doesn't look nice and shiny. Do you know you could measure the rate at which that frost film moved across? You could write a paper. You'd be the first person to ever record the solidification rate of spit. Well, it all sounds kind of funny, but you see, these things are really so. The metals are trying to talk to you. And all you have to do is to give them a chance and they'll say things. Like, for instance, I ask a question. I want to know if you think metals are elastic. Do you think metals are elastic? Not you, him. Do you? All right, you. I don't care. Yeah, sometimes. Anybody else think they're elastic? Sure. Well, let's vote again. How many of you think it's elastic? Up with your hands. And how many of you think it isn't elastic? A few. Well, let's see. You see, you really know all this because you know that they're elastic. When you came here riding in a car hit a pothole, what do you think not what you bounced on, what do you think the car bounced on, right? Spring made out of metallic material. But if you want to run a test, all you need is a coat hanger, you see? And you cut a specimen out of the coat hanger. You say, I'm going to run a test. And we say, I bend it, goes back. It's elastic. Did you know girls know more about metallurgy than boys do? I know. I have 3 daughters and a wife. And I used to watch them. Every night they go, toing, toing, toing. If that bobby pin doesn't grab your hair, you throw it away, right? It's got to be elastic. Watch it now, carefully. I'm going to deform it. And I say, I let it go, and it comes back. That was elastic. What's that? What do you call that? Anybody? Inelastic. Of course, that has a real peculiar definition. Well, let's see. We call this plastic deformation, whereas we call this elastic deformation. And what I want to know is, when I plastically deform it, did it get to be harder or did it get to be softer? And I think I'll pick on that pretty lady right there. Will you tell me? Harder or softer? Harder. And what do you say? Anybody? Connie? Yep, that's true. Harder? Softer. Softer. Well, see, we have a difference of opinion here. Would you mind coming down here a moment? Yeah. And bring your husband with you. Now, see, what we're going to do, we're going to run a little experiment on this. William, will you come on down too? Bill? Yeah. Now, I want you to stand right there in front of me, if you will. Now, what I'm going to do is, you see, what I have is I have a piece of aluminum, and it has big crystals in it, right? Isn't that pretty?
Yeah, it is pretty, yeah.
Right. Now, do you think you can bend that?
Not that big piece.
Not that big piece. Would you try?
Well, I'll try.
Okay. Well, I want you to hold it up and just put your fingers in the middle of it like that and see if you can bend it, right?
Yeah, that's it.
And just hold it up so everybody out there can see it now. Oh, look at that. Wait a minute. We won't put her in jail anyhow, right? See if you can bend it more than that.
My hands are hurting.
Well, now what I'd like for you to do is give it to Bill. And Bill, I want you to hold it up just like she did so everybody can see it. Just straighten it right back out. No, straighten it out.
Straighten it out.
Yeah, just straighten it right back out. Wow. Now, wait a minute. Don't go away. Now, let me tell you something, young at heart. We have to really run this as a fair experiment because just because it's a lady and a gentleman doesn't mean she's not stronger than he is. So, Connie, you straighten it back up. Up there and just rip it right down, will you? I want to vote. Did it get harder? Yeah, right. Metal's always to get more brittle, to get less ductile, but to get harder. Now, what I do is, when anybody helps me do anything, I always give them one of my campaign buttons. You see, people think I just walk around giving this talk for nothing, but I'm on the road for something. And so what I have is these beautiful little buttons that you can see the crystals in them. Aren't they pretty? Mm-hmm. And I give those to you because I know you're going to do something with it, you see. You're going to take that to your school or to see some young person, and you're going to show it to them, and you're going to say, hey, look at that. And they're going to say, doggone, what's that? That piece of aluminum. What's that business in aluminum? Well, they're crystals. And they're going to say, how come you can see them? And you're going to say, because of the chemical anisotropy. Right? And you know, once you use those big words, they assume that you're an authority in the subject. And once you establish yourself as an authority in the subject, you'll never admit you don't know anything about it. And so, first thing you know, one of your friends will be coming to school riding on a bike with a busted spring, and they say, Connie, you know something about metallurgy. What happened to the spring in my bike? And you won't know. But you're not going to admit it because you're an authority. You'll go look it up, and you'll find all about fracture and fatigue, and you'll really get interested, and the first thing you know, you'll be my graduate student. And thank you very much. And that's what I'm running for, you see, is graduate student. I have a button for everybody, and I'll tell you, there are a few students that I know, some of whom are sitting in this room, whom I won to this field with a little button. So don't overlook it as a device that will attract one heck of a lot of people. And don't be an Amos, because if you put it in your pocket with change, your change will rub up against it and destroy all the little etch pits, and it'll look like a dirty old piece of aluminum. So you have to wrap it up in a piece of Kleenex and keep it pristine clean like that. Hey, G, do you know what? When you have metal, sometimes they talk to you. They literally... Did a metal ever talk to you? Yeah. See, he's an Amos. Last Sunday, when you heard that church bell ring, what do you think it was made out of? Ah, yeah, right. But actually, what was happening was that whole structure was vibrating. But do you know sometimes the metal itself will speak to you? Honest engine. Hey, look, did you ever watch this TV show where you see a cowboy go in a bar room? Old bartender picks up the coin that's been thrown up on the bar, and he grabs it up and he bites on it. Why do you think he did that? Boots, why did he do that? Don't know? Well, I don't know either. So some people say, you know, it's so he can tell if it's real. And then I give him a coin and I say, you bite on this and tell me if it's real. And they can't do that. And you know, we're educated, and that old bartender didn't even get her to second grade. Now, I think I know why he bites on it. And I think the reason he bites on it is because it talks to him. You see, if you gave me a brand new Kennedy silver $50 and said, hey, Pon, I want you to make me about 200 of those by tomorrow morning. Now, I can do that so easy it isn't funny. By the way, I don't do that. That's against the law. But I could do that. And the reason I can do that is because freshly cast tin looks exactly like sterling silver. And if that coin were made out of sterling silver, I could copy it in plaster Paris, cast as many as I wanted, and I'd get that image out, right? But if I take a piece of tin and I bite on it, it's going to say, ouch! Do you believe it? You believe anything now, wouldn't you? Yeah, right. Well, the fact of the matter is, I have it, and if I bend it, it ought to say, ouch, right? Now I'm going to do it. I'm going to use the tabletop as a sounding board, and you can hear it. Listen. You hear that? You think that's my arthritis, don't you? No, factually, you see, you don't even have to put it on the table. Listen. You hear that? Now, what's going on? Let me tell you something. The field that I work in is called the field of metallurgy, is the oldest profession in the world. Now, most people think the oldest profession in the world is prostitution. But you see, we had to have coinage first. So we know, we know we've been there a long time. Actually, we don't know why that material makes a noise. Now, my colleagues can say, oh, come on, Bob, we do know. We don't even know why that metal got hard when we bent it. And my colleagues will say, oh, come on, we really do know. It's dislocation, interaction, or something like that. And all I have to say is, if we know, will you tell me why the U.S. government still puts hundreds of thousands of dollars a year into finding out all about it? We really don't know the ultimate reason for this. But I think I know. And that is, a tin crystal is a long, thin crystal. One direction is long, a lot bigger than the other one. And let us play a game. Let's suppose me in an elevator shaft. And here comes the elevator. Well, it didn't kill me, But you think I'm going to stand like this? No way. Why not? Because I'm a little bit narrower that way than I am the other way. So I'm going to flip over, take the pressure off my head. You squeezed a piece of tin, it's long in one direction, narrow in the other direction. He says, I don't have to put up with this stuff. So it flips over to remove the strain. And it flips over so fast, it breaks the sound barrier in the material. So what you hear is a manifestation of a shock wave, I think. See, I don't really know. It doesn't make any difference whether you believe the Bible as a document of religion or a document of history. We do know that the Israelites were under bondage with the Egyptians, and we do know that the record says when they left and they went out into the desert that they built an Ark of the Covenant, and on it they put 2 archangels, and they were made out of gold. And one was wrought, that means hammered into shape, plastically deformed, and the other one was cast. These people had to know about work hardening and dendrites, solidification, right? Way back in time. Well, it's pretty exciting, except these crystals sometimes won't even stay the way they're supposed to be. They change, they're Jekyll and Hyde. And I thought I could show you that today. I have on this board here, from these arms, I have a piece of piano wire. It's about 90 points of carbon. It's a steel. And if I heat this wire up, it'll get longer. I'm going to heat it up by passing an electric current through it. When it gets longer, the keys that are on the front of it will drop down. Actually, when you get to 1,333 degrees Fahrenheit, the crystal that's in there will decide, I don't want to be the kind of crystal I've been. I'm going to change to a new kind of crystal. And a new kind of crystal occupies less volume, and so this wire, which has been expanding, all of a sudden will turn around and start to contract. It's a little bit difficult to see it on heating up. When you cool it down, it's a lot easier to see. That is to say, it'll be red hot, it'll start to cool off, and it'll reach this point, and it'll go back down again. Let's see if I can make it work. By the way, you do understand that the proper definition of a good professor is a guy whose demonstrations never work, right? So if it works, you see it. If not, I'm a good professor. Well, let's see. You want to watch the keys now. And I heat it up. Well, here we go. And it hesitates, and it actually goes back up a little bit, and then keeps on going down. Now let's watch it on a reverse strip. It goes up, and down, and up. We'll try it one more time. It goes down, 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 down. Hesitates and goes up a little bit. Wire's getting red hot. You see that? Now we'll let it cool off, and it goes up, and down, and up. Do you know what you just saw? You just saw the reason you're sitting there. That's the phenomena in iron that enables us to take a bar of iron, a bar of steel, cut it half in two, heat treat one half of it, and use it as a tool to carve the other half. If we couldn't do that, we wouldn't have all the wonderful machinery and buildings and everything that we have, all because of what that little crystal wants to do in the iron. Isn't it beautiful? Well, I could show it to you a lot easier. All we're talking about is crystals changing if you want to heat them up a little bit. Now, all I really have, this particular material is what I want to talk about, not all of that. That's just a marker to keep it straight. My man with the cigarette lighter left. Oh, he left it. I can work it. Yeah, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plastically deform the material, the little black material. I plastically deform it into a little loop. Oh, great. Did it get harder or softer? Nope, not this one. Actually, what happened to this one is, when I bent it, it changed crystal structure. It changed phase. It changed to something else. And if I heat it up, it just goes back the way it was before, you see? How do you like that? How'd you like to have the fenders on your car made out of that stuff? That'd be great. Well, you see, these metals do all sorts of crazy things. They change, they talk to you, they tell you things. But one of the most amazing things that all happened about 1960, about the year Dr. Green came to Johns Hopkins University. There was a guy out in California named Paul Dewey who found out that with certain alloys, you could quench them fast enough, and if you did that, they would stay amorphous. They wouldn't be crystalline. And all of a sudden, we had metallic glasses. Well, I'm not going to make any metallic glasses today, but I am going to demonstrate for you the technique that's used to make those. And what we're going to do is we're going to do some solidification, and Eric Soxy is going to help me. He said he would. And what we're going to do now, and you can practice on, you're going to stand right here, Eric, if you will, and face the audience. You ever run one of these things?
No.
You never did? You know what it's called?
Sanding machine.
Well, it's called a drill, actually. But most people don't bake cakes with drills, right? And so this got a cake plate on the end of it. And what we're going to do is hook it up. So if you squeeze the trigger, it ought to run real fast. Try it. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to get over here and I'm going to melt some metal. Now I want you to stand right here in the corner like this, right? And I want you to hold it straight. Can you hold it straight like that? Mm-hmm. Just like that, right? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to melt some tin, and I put it in a glass tube, has a little hole in the bottom, and I have to fire up this torch to melt it with. I need 3 hands. Okay. I'm going to melt the metal in this little piece of glass tubing. And when it's all melted, I'm going to squirt it out of this glass tube. And what it's going to do is hit this cake pan. It's going to stay on there for a very, very short period of time. It's going to come off on the other side solid. Do you believe that, Eric? Yeah. You're willing to try, huh? Now, when I tell you to turn it on, you turn it on and leave it on, right? Don't you turn it off, because we'll have problems. Now, what's going to happen is the metal, this metal is tin, and it melts about 450 degrees Fahrenheit. On this side, it's going to be 450 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to hit that cake pan right there. It's going to come off on the opposite side, and it's going to be at room temperature. It's going to cool at about 1,000,000 degrees per second. So, Owen, you can stand over there and catch it in your mouth to prove the point, if you will. Okay. That's what I like, a willing helper. Okay. It only takes a short period of time to melt this down. And Eric, when I tell you, you squeeze the trigger, you can catch it in your hands. Don't catch it in your mouth. Fact of the matter is, he could catch it in his mouth, but we won't risk that. Okay, it's almost molten, Eric. It's getting up there. Are you about ready? Okay, when I say pull the trigger, now you do it. Okay, pull the trigger. Got my little bulb on backwards. Okay, keep it going. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Well, let me tell you something. I've set this whole thing up to do a little testing now. How many of you saw that red board of mine? Did you notice anything unusual in that red board of mine? How many of you saw something unusual? A lot of Amoses sitting out there. See, if you didn't see that in the middle of the red board there's an insignia, then you're an Amos. If you saw that there's something written in the middle and you didn't notice it said ASM, you're still an Amos. If you noticed it said ASM and you thought it was scratched in there, you're still an Amos. And if you saw that there were little crystals that were making the ASM and you don't care how they got there, you're still an Amos, right? Well, let me tell you how much of an Amos I am. I made that board about 40 years ago, as I told you before. And when I did that, and I used to give this talk, I used to come home all bubbling over to tell my wife about all the You can't imagine the things I learned from my audiences. Like I was in Canada, and I was talking to the 4th grade. I said, does anybody here can tell me what a metal is? They're not like you are. This little boy on the front row stood up and says, yes, sir. I said, you can? He says, yes, sir. I said, tell me what a metal is. He said, that's something they pin on you if you're a hero. Well, you see? So all these fascinating things happen. And I'd go home, tell my wife about them, and I'd always put the board up there. And I have I have 3 sons and 3 daughters, and my middle son is an artist. You know, he paints and he sculpts and he weaves and he makes dresses and he knits and he tats and crochets. He does everything that everybody would like to do. And don't get me wrong, he's a big, stalwart, heavy guy with 2 beautiful children. But he was 19 years old. He looked at this. He was going to college down at the University of Tampa. He says, hey, Pop, see those little crystals? And I said, yep. He says, could you make those little crystals inside a big crystal? I said, Billy, they are inside the big crystal. He said, no, Dad. I said, they're among the big crystals. Could you make them inside? Well, I never thought about that before, but that's a fact. And I said, I don't know, but I'll find out because the authority on this is Dr. Green. And so I came to Hopkins and asked him, and he didn't know. And we went and looked it up in the literature, and the literature didn't know. And I said, well, why did you want to do that when he first told me that? He says, if I could make those little crystals inside of a big crystal, he said, I could make a picture. See, he's an artist. Artists are very good at observing things. I said, well, Bill, look, I have some labs at home. You come home next summer, I'll let you try that. If you succeed, I think you will have done something really revolutionary. And it doesn't make any difference. You got to work. I have to send him back to college anyhow, right? See, he worked all summer. He worked about, 8, 10 hours a day. He worked all summer, and he succeeded in doing it. And I have the first thing that he ever made here. And actually, it's a terrestrial sphere. He took a single crystal of aluminum, and he caused the land masses of the Earth to be polycrystalline aggregate on this thing. And the oceanic masses stay a single crystal. It's inside of plastic because people keep getting it dirty from handling it. It was a gem. Nobody had seen anything like this. Channel 67 in Baltimore at that particular time was running auction sales to make money because they couldn't advertise. And so Billy sent him one of his crystals, one of his worlds, one of his globes as something they could auction off. It auctioned off for $960. It set his price. You can buy one of those anytime you want for $1,000. And he went on, he says, gee whiz, I'd like to do a portrait. And my son Rob up there, he says, gee whiz, I have a friend and he wants a portrait of his dog. So they grew this great big single crystal. And he plastically deformed the surface with a ballpoint pen, recrystallized it, polished it all off, etched it, and he had a picture of a dog, like no man had ever done before. He applied for a patent on it. He made a patent application. The historian that we have for metals his name's Cyril Stanley Smith. He's a very famous metallurgist and metal historian. And I sent him a piece of this work, and he sent a letter back and says, this is probably the first piece of new metal art medium since the 13th century. What a document to go to the patent office with, right? He got his patent. He plays a game. He couldn't always grow a big sheet like that. He tries to grow a big sheet. He gets a lot of big crystals in it. And when you were a little boy, a little girl, did you ever lie up on the bank and look at the clouds and say, hey, that one looks like an anvil, and that one looks like an old Ford, and that one looks like my mother-in-law, whatever you say, right? And well, he looks at all these crystals that are etched out until he sees a picture. And being an artist, he plastically deforms that image into the material, recrystallizes it, and grows pictures that look like this. Isn't that gorgeous? You see, you don't need the microscope. But the thing I want to tell you is, a 19-year-old kid did that. You know why? Because it wasn't an Amos. He saw in nature, he saw this peculiar, unusual phenomena that if he could just capture it, man, he'd have something new. Now I want to tell you something, young at heart. We got a problem. The problem is we don't have enough metal to go around. You and I, every man, woman, and child in this country consumes 1,183 pounds of metal a year. in the form of razor blades, bottle caps, automobiles, beer cans. And we take all of that material that is concentrated in ores at the earth and are refined and put in our hands. Of that approximately 1,200 pounds, we recover 400 pounds. 400 pounds we know how to recover and we don't recover, and 400 pounds we don't know how to recover. In the city of Baltimore, we put $1.6 million worth of tin in the landfill every year. And we don't have any tin in this country. And we don't have any manganese in this country. And we import about, 50% of our aluminum in this country. Oh, we find exciting little things out there, like this manganese nodule rolls around on the floor of the ocean just outside of, say, Cape Hatteras, down in that section. And they dredge them up. It's got manganese in it. It's got about 13 other things in it, too. And it's very difficult to learn how to separate them. Oh, if we could separate the stuff easily, we have an abundance of material here. Actually, aluminum is one of the most abundant things on the face of the earth. If you owned an acre of land and you dug it down to 6 feet depth, if it had the average crustal abundance of aluminum in that 6 foot, you would have $500,000 worth of aluminum. So why are we digging up our backyards? Because we don't have it at that ore level, that concentration. We can't do it. But out there in Bingham, out there in our west, in all of our west, we have processes that take less than 1% of copper, and we refine it so that you can manufacture things and it's something worth doing, right? Who's going to learn how to do all of this stuff? Who's going to save that $1.6 million? Who's going to learn how to find new processes to recover that 400 pounds? Who's going to find processes that, let us say, extract stuff from the earth like we have never done before? You know, if you look around the audience and you see a gray-headed person, or maybe even a bald-headed person, that guy isn't going to do it. That's a fact. You know who's going to do it? The kids, the 19-year-olds. But we've got to teach them something very important to do that. And what we have to teach them is that there is this problem in the world. You and I, every man, woman, and child in this country, require the production of 112 pounds of material a day in the form of paper, concrete, metals, alloys, all of the asphalt, plastics, all of the things that we use. That's how much we demand to be produced. There is a demographer in the University of Ohio in Athens who has computed the fact that with the population growth in the earth today, on earth today, with the consumption that we have, if the rest of the world, all those third world nations, the rest of the world required the production of 112 pounds of material a day, in 1,500 years, we would consume a half of the mass of the earth. Now that's ridiculous. We can't do that, right? All we're really saying is we take it out, it requires a certain energy to take it out. We throw it back, it's going to take a lot more energy to dredge it back out again. So what's got to happen? Young people, your young people, have got to be interested in this as a societal problem. It is a societal problem. If you became a material scientist interested in solving this problem, you'd probably do more for the world than the social scientists, the religionists, the rest of the scientists put together. It's the most important field. Well, young at heart, I've tried to talk you into being metallurgists. I don't know whether you noticed it or not, and I really don't care whether you do or you don't. And the reason is you can't escape them. You see, you are locked into them. The fact of the matter is, if I were a magician and I reached out to this young man and I took all the metals away from him, he'd have holes in his teeth, his pants would fall off, he'd be in the basement. Listen, young at heart. If I were that magician and I could take all the metals away from him, he'd never hear a bugle again. He'd never hear a piano again. He would never hear a radio again. Well, how are you going to do this? There's one big secret that you have to learn. Don't be an Amos. William Shakespeare told us that. There's a second thing that you have to learn. Whatever you do in this world, do it with enthusiasm. You know, like if you tell a joke, tell it with enthusiasm. Did you ever hear this? A guy sits down to the piano and says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. If you ever heard this before, stop me. Of course not. Why not? Because a piece of good music well rendered is worth hearing over and over and over again. A good joke well told is worth telling time and let me show you what I mean. A little boy came home from Sunday school and he says, hey, Ma, you know what they told me? She says, no, Tommy, what? He said, they told me people are made out of dust. She said, well, Tommy, I think that's right. He said, but Mom, they told me that when people die, they turn back to dust. And she said, Tommy, I think that's right. Well, he was happy. His mother agrees with his Sunday school teacher. He went upstairs to play, and he came running down and said, Mom, come upstairs. I just looked under the bed. Somebody's either coming or going. I'm going. Cocktails at 5:30, last pavilion. Thank you.